Here we go. We're on gregtrimble.com. This is a Mormon truth video, and I'm going to be taking a close look and basically dissecting some of what Mr. Greg Trimble has got to say in his article called The Coming Revolution Inside of Mormonism. Well, I've taken exception to some of the things that Greg has said. His Book of Mormon challenge, I basically decimated. He used all sorts of false premises, and frankly, they fell apart when we examined them. So I've challenged Greg numerous times to respond to that, including on 3 Mormons, where he was answering everybody else, or other people's at least, questions or comments to him, but once again he ignored mine. So here we go, Greg. How honest are you? The coming revolution inside of Mormonism. Let's look at what Greg has to say. How honest is Greg? And what is the web he is spinning this time? Well, I've taken a look at it, so I already know. Says Greg, I've had many experiences lately with people online and offline that lead me to believe that there's a coming revolution that will be taking place inside of Mormonism. This revolution will not be against the prophets and apostles. You're right, Greg. That one's already been on for quite a while. It won't be against history or doctrine. Well, Greg, that's on, and it seems like you don't want to respond to doctrinal questions, to rewriting and whitewashing of history, to the changing of doctrines, and the disavowing of things that are actually scriptural, and then pretending that it all came from Brigham Young on an off day. So, not going to go too deep into that at this moment, but nice how you started off with trying to undercut the real premise for the revolution that is going on within the church, the mass apostasy that's going on since the church's history has become exposed to many more people on the internet, and the brethren seem unable to respond honestly. In fact, they've used deliberate deception in the Gospel Topics essays on LDS.org, which I have taken the trouble to document and have videos concerning that, especially on the race and priesthood and on the DNA studies versus the Book of Mormon. You know, the Lamanites that disappeared into a vast crowd of pre-Adamites that survived the fictional flood. Yeah, those ones. Anyway, we're going to go on with this. So, nice try slipping that one in, Greg. And it won't undermine the foundational principles upon which the church was initially built upon. Actually, the exposing of the rewritten history and the changing doctrines has already done that, Greg. It's just a matter of how many people find out about it. No, this revolution will be against culture and everything that entails. This revolution will be against those that judge, those that hate, and those that refuse to see past their narrow, regurgitated, cliché point of views. This revolution will be a revolution of love. Oh my! A revolution of love. Well, you're straight out of the 60s, Greg. You're the uprising of the downtrodden proletariat who have been oppressed. By whom, Greg? Where does this culture come from? Huh? Where does it come from? This is where you're going to start to twist things. Because, you see, where does the hatred come from? Where is the hateful language coming from, and where has it always come from? Well, we're going to explore that. I don't think it's from the peons at the bottom of the food chain in the church. Do you remember what was happening in Israel right about the time that Christ came upon the scene? Sorry, Greg, I wasn't there, and about 20 historians never noticed that anybody named Jesus Christ was there, or anybody like that. We have a Flavius Josephus, who appears to be an invention of the Flavian family, a ruling Roman family in the area, but we have no historical record of any Jesus of Nazareth there, actually. You said Christ. That's interesting. That's not really a name, and I don't think any Jew ever named their child Christ. but let's go on. The culture in Israel when Christ showed up was one of the most judgmental and hypocritical cultures the world had ever seen, based on your New Testament storybook, I suppose. It was very isolated and it was a very isolated and unaccepting culture. But Christ showed up and cast a net over all types of people. All types of people, says Greg. The Greeks, the Romans, the Samaritans, and every other nation across the globe. Really? His net covered even the worst of repentant sinners. Well, Greg, I'll give you that it seemed to be good with the repentant sinners a lot of the time. But that first part, I'm going to take a big exception to, but I'll read on a little bit first. The only people that were excluded or damned were the unrepentant elite, the scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites, who strain at a net and swallow a camel. It was Christ who brought with him a revolution of love, empathy, and compassion. He built a culture that was geared towards the lowly of heart and revolted against those that spent their lives pointing out the flaws of others. For ye are like unto whited sepulchres, which indeed appear beautiful outward, like a temple, but are within full of dead man's bones and all manner of uncleanness. Says Greg, the bulk of Israel was living according to their culture and their superstition. Okay. Great, Greg. Well, let's go back there. So, Jesus cast a net over all types of people with his gospel. The Greeks, the Romans, the Samaritans, and every other nation across the globe. You know, 3 Mormons recently were spewing stuff like that. I don't think it was the episode that you showed up on, Greg, but at any rate, let's take a look at that. Let's see what Jesus actually has to say here as far as other people. When he's put in that position, let's see how accepting and all-inclusive Jesus is. Okay, verse 22, And behold, a woman of Canaan came out of the same coasts, and cried unto him, saying, Have mercy on me, O Lord, thou son of David. My daughter is grievously vexed with a devil. But Jesus, he answered her not a word. Jesus just blew her off? Where's the inclusion there, Greg? Oh, she is a Canaanitish woman, maybe, but wait a minute. And his disciples came and besought him, saying, Send her away, for she crieth after us. Get rid of this lady. She's causing people, she's causing a commotion here. Just get rid of her. Who cares about her, Who gives a damn about her child, right? Nice apostles. But he answered and said, I am not sent, but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Say what, Greg? All-inclusive? Jesus? Greeks? Romans? Everybody? Phoenicians? Canaanites? Sorry, Greg. Jesus is all into Israeli supremacy. He's all about Jew supremacy here, it looks like, actually. Jesus is saying, But he answered unto and said, I am not sent, but unto the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Then she came and worshipped him, saying, Help me, Lord! But he answered and said, It is not meet to take the children's bread and cast it to dogs. Oh, that's a pretty nice reference. Okay, so, I'm sorry. My blessings are not to be wasted on people like you. Apparently dogs were not well thought of. I've really missed a couple of really nice dogs. I don't want to talk so badly about dogs, but if that's maybe that's like a racial slur or something. Maybe that would be like some sort of racial slur that might be made in our day. Maybe you can think of one and replace the word dogs with something else. It is not meat. It is not... sorry. It's not part of the program to waste my blessings on garbage like people from your nation or race. Is that maybe closer to today's language, or maybe something a little bit more abrasive? Maybe I shouldn't say anything like that, huh? Okay, well, sorry. She begs him some more and says, Lord, even the dogs lick up or eat up the crumbs that fall from the master's table. So he says, all right. Daughter's healed. Hit the road, babe. You've had some great faith here. Okay. Oh, woman, great is thy faith. Well, you get the blessing you asked for. Ciao. Have a nice life. So, all-inclusive? Well, Greg, apparently you've misrepresented things just as you guys did on the Three Mormon show that you were on, and every other show that they do that's about any serious gospel doctrine or matter. Yeah, so anyway, there's a version in Mark that's pretty similar, but it's not quite as detailed. And Jesus blows her off, and it's the same thing basically, except for it calls her like something kind of close to a Phoenician in that one. Anyway, she's not of the chosen race. So you want to talk about Jewish supremacy here. Jesus Christ appears to be the author of it, not the all-inclusive guy that you try to preach he that he is, when the scriptures, in fact, don't seem to be very supportive of that. All right, let's get back to it. We busted you once here, Greg, and we're going to do it again and again. Okay, so scribes, Pharisees, hypocrites. Yeah, okay. The bulk of Israel was living according to their culture and their superstition. Judaism. This has been the bane of each and every covenant society, which caused Joseph Smith to say, what many people call sin is not sin. I do many things to break down superstition, and I will break it down. That's in the history of the church. It says the doctrine of this church doesn't lose people. It's the culture and superstition that causes unnecessary strife. Is it, Greg? There are 50,000 people subscribe to the ex-Mormon subreddit, and a great number of those people state that it is the covered up, whitewashed, rewritten lies about the church's history, coupled with what the truth is about the church's history, the ever-changing doctrines and continuous deception used in that cover-up, the foundation upon dishonesty, which has caused them to leave, or many of them. Some of them just wanted to have a beer with their pals at a barbecue, but a good portion actually went because of doctrine, exactly opposite of what you've said here. All right, superstition, doctrine. Sorry, Greg, you keep trying to slip these little things in. They're big things, but you try to slip them in these little finish-up sentences. So, the doctrine of this church doesn't lose people. Sorry, Greg. It does, and tens of thousands will attest to that. Probably 100,000 or more resign from the church officially every year. I can imagine a time not too far off. Okay, before we get into that, Greg, about Joseph Smith saying, I do many things to break down superstition. What many people call sin is not sin. I wanted to see something about that. Yeah, that's kind of what he said to Sidney Rigdon's daughter when he tried to talk her into bed. And she actually had a letter from Joseph Smith on that very subject, because he failed in his first attempt to get her into bed. And after he had sent someone over to a funeral to ask her to come meet with him. That's right. And he locked the door and tried to talk her into bed, and she wasn't up for it. So he brought in Orson Hyde's wife, who was a shared wife that Joseph Smith has shown by the church is sealed to her, because she said yes to Joseph's propositioning of her while her husband was out faithfully serving a mission, and Joseph got his way with her. So he brought her in, but she failed to convince Rigdon's daughter as well, so Joseph actually wrote her a letter. And in that letter, he told her things just very similar to what we read there. Very similar. Sidney called him out, and he went over to see him finally, and Joseph tried to say it never happened. Nancy came out and said, "Baloney, you're lying and you know it." And eventually Joseph Smith admitted it to Sidney Rigdon. This rift probably never actually healed between them. But I wanted to read what Joseph said, some of the things he said in his attempt on her virtue. Well, I'll have to just go up to the top here. I missed one of the things that I wanted to read here, but this has got a few excerpts from the letter, and you can look it up online and read the whole thing. Anyway, we have Joseph telling her that God is much more liberal than people think. According to what we've got here, what do we have? Okay, he told her she had the blessings of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and he told the same kind of garbage to Sarah Pratt, who also told him to hit the road. He wasn't going to get any action in her bedroom either. Oh, but I had such a nice little quote or two from that letter. He says, "Our Heavenly Father is more liberal in His views and boundless in His mercies and blessings than we are ready to believe or receive." Yeah. Joseph says to her, "Happiness is the object and design of our existence. That which is wrong under one circumstance may be and often is right under another." Anyway, he tried and he tried, but he couldn't get any from Nancy. Similar story with Jane Law and Sarah Pratt, but he got his way with Sister Hyde and many others. So about 11 of the girls shown sealed to Joseph Smith on FamilySearch.org are other men's wives. I guess Joseph was destroying their families for all eternity. Section 132 doesn't say anything about how you can take other guys' wives, but, well, it wasn't doctrine then anyway. As a matter of fact, it wasn't presented to the church till long after Joseph Smith was dead. So I guess we've got some kind of retroactive authority sealing him to these women, especially other guys' wives, which there's no basis for at all. In fact, what was in the Doctrine and Covenants was put in there by Joseph Smith to calm people down about the rumors going around. Yeah, stating that any more than one wife was absolutely adultery, and that you could only remarry if your ex-spouse was deceased. Anyway, let's get back to this. I'm not going to get all into the Rigdon letter. This isn't going to be all about that, but yeah, Joseph said that the Lord's views were much more liberal than what we suppose. I guess they must be pretty liberal when Joseph wanted to talk a woman into the bedroom, as so many wives and daughters of the apostles experienced, along with potentially hundreds of others, according to Joseph H. Jackson's testimony, which seems to be corroborated by Sister Pratt and others who seem to have a much more impeccable reputation. And even John Bennett, who had a messed up reputation. Joseph ruined everyone's reputation, if possible, that went against him, that said no to his advances. And Bennett got caught in the spiritual wife system, so he had to be X'd, and he went ahead and exposed Joseph Smith. But anyway, his participation in that has kind of ruined his name. But somehow Joseph Smith's name has survived among many. Alrighty, Greg. Well, I don't want to get too far off on these tangents, because you see, Greg here is telling us that this culture is bad, this judgmental culture. And that is true. Greg says something true. And Brigham Young told us that the devil would tell us 9 lies 9 truths to tell us one lie that we'd believe. And what is Greg doing here? So he told us that there was great hypocrisy in Israel. But may I remind you, Greg, that was coming from the top. That was coming from the top of the religion at that point. And it's coming from the top now. Just the same. So Greg has this experience that he'd like to share with us. How he went into a trailer park and found a woman who was discouraged. Very discouraged because of her choices. And how difficult it was going to be for her to come back to church with judgmental people there. And where does the judgmental attitude come from? That's what I want to explore, because I'm going to show that this comes from the top. Anyone who spoke out against adultery of Joseph Smith was condemned as a heretic, as an apostate, an anti-Mormon, a blackleg, a counterfeiter, which Joseph Smith was apparently involved in, according to Joseph Jackson and others. Yes, he denounced in the vilest of terms all of his 3 witnesses, in the vilest of terms, in some cases. So, as did Rigdon. But Rigdon held back against Joseph Smith despite Joseph going after his daughter. Do you remember what was happening in Israel about the time of Christ? Yes, we read that. Okay, so shall we get into the trailer park here? The sinless need no physician. Oh, that sort of a thing. There are people who have sin. Okay, so they need to be able to come back to church, even if they smell of cigarette smoke. And, alright. So, there are people whose lives have been difficult and who have made choices they regret with alcoholism and drugs and that sort of a thing, but they want to come to church because somehow church is good, they think. Well, at church they do tell us that we shouldn't drink and smoke. But, you can hear that elsewhere. So this woman felt really bad, but he told her about the story of Alma the Younger. Alma the Younger, who was one of the vilest of sinners. Somehow that's an interesting story. I don't know if I want to go too far into that, but the vilest of sinners, how vile is vile? Were they so vile that they were telling 14-year-olds that an angel with a flaming sword would kill them if they didn't give it up to the prophet? Were they telling 14-year-old that her whole family for generations thereafter would be saved and exalted in the celestial kingdom if she gave in to the prophet? Were they? That sounds like pretty vile sin. Anyway, these guys were in a storybook that seems to not be anything that we can find any historical backup for. So, what about what Greg is going to say here soon? Okay, he says, because of these repentant boys' ability to make a comeback, the Nephites and Lamanites were blessed and all this good stuff happened. And so, let's see the revolution that Greg wants to talk to us about. Okay. Last paragraph of this portion, he says, I see a place where people have study groups. Again, to provide support for those that need friends to talk to about things they hear on the internet and social media. Things like we've been discussing. Things like Joseph Smith taking other men's wives. Things like, why would God command Joseph Smith to break his marriage covenants, which should have been in full force, and he should have had the integrity to keep? Things like, why was the Book of Abraham actually not written by the hand of Abraham, but a funeral text of the Egyptians from 2,000 years later? It had nothing at all to do with Abraham. Why is the Book of Abraham filled with false information? Those kind of things. Why does the DNA of the American Indians tell us that they're from Siberia and there are no Lamanites from Israel here? Why do they tell us that, that African Negroes couldn't have the priesthood, and now explain it by saying it was all Brigham Young's racism, and that a skin of blackness is not a sign of divine disfavor or a curse when the Book of Mormon clearly says that it is. You know, things like that. So this is Greg. I see a place where people have study groups to provide support for friends who need to talk about things they hear on the internet and social media. I see a place where people support one another and ask questions, resolve concerns, speak honestly about things that give them trouble in life and in the church. I see a time when home teaching is just referred to as ministering, and more lessons will revolve around love and not quotas. I see a time where fellowshipping will be replaced with friendshipping, and where pure love is a stronger motivation than guilt. Guilt of not having your numbers done so you can be berated in a personal priesthood interview. Is that what you're talking about, Greg? Well, where does that culture come from? It sounds like it comes from an authoritarian sales style organization based on quotas. It comes from the top, Greg. It comes from the top when we have judgment placed upon people who actually share their thoughts when they notice that the history of the church does not represent what is found in the primary source documents at all. When we find things have been whitewashed, when we see the changing doctrines, and we see that we do not have an all-knowing, unchanging, merciful God guiding the church, but we have a constant change going on in these doctrines and a constant cover-up. If we speak out, people are excommunicated. What about the September 6th, Greg? Were they all bad people? What about William Law? Was he a bad guy because he said that Joseph Smith had tried to get at his wife, which she also attested to? Was he a bad guy because he said Section 132 really existed and Joseph Smith had lied when he was denying it completely? Was William Law a bad guy to print those things in the expositor, that Joseph Smith was involved with other women, that he did have Section 132, that he did preach to women in secret and those of his secret groups, like the Council of 50, the doctrines of the spiritual wife system, in which hundreds of women were basically enslaved in Nauvoo as sexual servants to Joseph and those of his inner circle. Yeah, when William Law spoke out on this, he was condemned as a wicked man, as an apostate. Well, perhaps an apostate, but not a bad apostate, because he told the truth and he and his wife stood for virtue, as did Nancy Rigdon, as did Sarah Pratt, as did many others. And their names tend to be maligned by Joseph Smith. The hateful language came from the top to discredit, to devalue those people who spoke out truth, which was not faith promoting in the first presidency of the church, being guided by divine beings and living divine principles. That's the problem, Greg. We have an authoritarian administration here that does not allow freedom of speech. There is massive censorship. They say, we believe. Well, what about some of those we believes? We believe in being honest, chaste, benevolent. But Joseph Smith was none of those. He lied about his sexual promiscuity from the beginning. He covered up. He said he was not involved in anything sexual beyond the relationship with Emma, which is a complete and total lie. He said it in public. He said it in his actions by publishing in the Doctrine and Covenants the revelation, I think it was 101 at the time maybe, stating that you could not have more than one wife and that such was adultery. And he said that he gave this revelation or doctrine as clarification because the church had been plagued with wickedness or sins or abominations such as fornication and polygamy. I've never actually seen much more of a hypocrite than Joseph Smith. He wasn't chaste, he wasn't honest, and he wasn't benevolent as he ruined the reputations of people that did stand for virtue. Sorry, Greg. Members will increase their personal studying of scriptures again. Missionaries will actually be memorizing scriptures again so that there will be water in their well. Oh, so the brethren have been misguided in the Preach My Gospel format, Greg? You are telling us that you're more enlightened than the brethren now? Careful, buddy. They might excommunicate you. And callings won't be looked on as promotions where congratulations are in order. Any form of pageantry will die in with this revolution. During the uprising of the greatest generation of saints the world has ever seen. I hope this revelation happens fast because the world is in need of love. And that love will need to go out of Zion. Well, thanks, Greg. Pageantry. So I guess we'll kill the Manti pageant and the Palmyra pageant. Is there a Nauvoo pageant? I may not be up on all the pageants. Yeah, the church is a master marketing organization, a multi-billion-dollar conglomerate of corporations, including corporations like Beneficial Life Insurance. Beneficial Life. Doesn't Beneficial Life also own, the beneficial lending? One of the most despicable subprime lenders that basically loan shark with exorbitant interest rates, raping those who need a break most. And you'd think within the church somebody helping these people out would be nice, but no. Instead, companies like Beneficial are just there to rape them financially, to drain them. They are absolute loan sharks. And that's how life insurance money is invested, among other ways, in despicable companies like that. Companies like Beneficial Life or HFC or Ames Home Loan. And so the church is totally in to that company. They outright own Beneficial. In fact, they had like a Beneficial building right next to the San Diego Temple. That's where the tours were launched from during the during the pageantry there, that we can call the the open houses at the temple there, Greg. So pageantry, the church is all about marketing. They're all about pageantry, pal. And this culture of guilt with the home teaching, that comes from pressure from above. With the missionaries, pushed to bear testimony of things that they don't even believe in, or pushed to go on missions when they don't even want to or believe it, but they're guilted into it. Girls are told not to marry these guys unless they serve an honorable mission. I mean, all the horrendous pressure that is put on people to conform to what they say at the top and destroy their self-identity. Wear your hair a certain way, do certain things with or with it. You can have one earring or something like that, and one set of earrings if you're a girl. You can't have any. I don't like tattoos, but all sorts of behavioral control, just like the Jehovah's Witnesses and Moonies and Scientologists all use cult mind control tactics, and the church is no different. So, sorry, Greg, these negative judgmental things come from the top. Yes, because those who are not worthy are cast out. And especially those who find that they no longer want to be part are denigrated. And to the point where Brigham Young taught to murder them. In order to save their souls, slit their throats. Yes. So the blood atonement doctrine. Is that not a hate doctrine? That came from Brigham Young. That came from the top, Greg. It came from the top. Slit their throats. If you love them, kill them if they've left the church. Blood atonement doctrine. Christ's blood will not save them from their sins and from outer darkness. You must shed their blood. That's a hate doctrine, Greg. Don't blame it on the peons at the bottom of the pyramid. Blame it where it comes from. Blame it from the top. We see what Yahweh did in the Old Testament. Numbers chapter 31 has him ordering massacre of people that did nothing to the Israelites, massacring the fathers, bringing home the prisoners, massacring all the mothers, massacring the children, the little boys, and only saving alive the virgins, which he gave to the soldiers to do with as they pleased, and a certain portion to the rest of the men, and a few to the priests, to do with, I suppose, as they pleased until they sacrificed them as human sacrifices along with the animals who were also allocated to the same offering. Was it a heave offering or a thank offering? I don't know, but I've never read of an animal that survived an offering in Israel, and the girls were allocated to the same offering. Yeah. Not sure if they were still virgins by the time they hit the altar with those priests. Then again, I'm not so sure that any of those stories are actually true, since they are written so long after the time of Moses and when they were pretended to have been written. Thanks, Greg. Mormon culture. All the guilt, all the shame that was put upon people in order to shame them into following the leaders, the divine leaders, those who speak with and for God, the apostles of Jesus Christ, who have changed their stories over and over, just as Joseph did with that first vision baloney that he made up in 1838 and published in 1842. The first vision that no one in his day ever heard of, including his family. Well, Greg, have a great day with your revolution. Mormon Truth out. If you want to like and subscribe and comment, you're welcome to. Especially you, Greg. Especially you.